This is going to be a garden room.
And that is Lee. So he's normally helping us on our projects, but this time we're going to be helping him.
The only problem is, today is the 3rd of December.
And the reason that's a problem, we're expecting a storm.
Storm Darragh, that's going to bring in a spell of heavy rain.
And unlike some of our other builds, this one is going to be quite an easy design to follow. So let's show you how quick we can get one of these built. And if we don't, we're going to get very wet.
Before we start framing, we need to lay 1 course of bricks all the way around the perimeter.
So Brad and Tommy got on with setting out 4 our bricks, checking our diagonals, making sure the building's going to be square, and then chalk down some lines before checking the levels of that concrete pad. Then they could finally get some of those engineering bricks down.
As you can see, there's a gap in the brickwork, and this is where the door's going to go.
The reason we leave the bricks out on that section is so that we can get the maximum height door within this building, because we're permitted to that 2.5 meters. When it comes to permitted development, every inch counts. What's happening now is we're filling up the little holes in these perforated engineering bricks, and that is just so we've got something solid to put our bolts into when we bolt down our plate. So Tommy got this done in super quick time. Lucky for us, he is Lee's friend, and he'd done it on super short notice. All of our bricks are laid, they are still wet, but that doesn't mean we can't get on with a bit of framing. Before we did, we needed to set up some tools. So we're about ready to cut our studs, and a way to work out how long they're going to be is to take 2500, because we're under permitted development, and we take into account our brick course, our bottom plate, 2 top plates, then we've got our rafters for our roof, and also our furring strips, 18mm OSB, and the roof covering, and we just measure all of this and deduct it from that 2500. Ours come in at a nice round 2 meters. So I set up a stop on my saw stand and started to cut all of our studs at once. Now I haven't got to get my tape measure out anymore. Really good. This is a great little tip. Mark on the saw, and now we can cut all of our noggins from the scraps.
Happy birthday, dear Brad. Happy birthday to you.
So with Brad's birthday celebrations over, we got on with creating our stud walls. Something I changed on this one that I don't normally do is, rather than measuring out our sole plate and marking it with a pencil, we cut our noggin at 355, and that's going to give us our 400 centres, so I didn't have to mark anything. So I am building my walls with a nail gun, but you don't need a nail gun. If you want to use some screws and a screw gun, you can also do that. When it comes down to the nail gun, for me it's purely down to speed, so I just do it to save time, but if you do want to screw it, of course you can.
While Phil's building that wall, I want you to come over and have a look so I can actually explain what he's doing. Phil's building full walls to sit on the brickwork, so we're going to be able to fit 1 there, 2 there, and the rest we're going to piece in.
And that's because we used the 2.4 metre lengths. And you'll see a world of pure imagination.
We're losing it. I'm losing it. The older we get, we're losing it more.
Whoopsie. Yep, I definitely think I'm starting to lose my mind.
Happy birthday to me. That's the reason why you should subscribe, because it's my birthday and I'm making videos for you guys at home.
Like he had anything better to do anyway. So with the last of the big walls built, it was time to pack up for the evening and start a new day tomorrow.
Now that all our full sections of walls are built, we're going to move on and measure for the smaller sections and build them.
The way I did that is to use one of the full length studs and mark out where I'm having those full length walls, and then we measure up for the smaller sections we need to build to attach to the rest of the walls. Really coming together now.
We've just started.
Yeah, so? No one's got time for that sort of negativity, Brad. With all of our measurements taken, we get on with building up those smaller sections of the wall. All of the walls are built. Now I'm going to get on with these little corner details. If you're not planning on boarding or even plasterboarding the inside of your building, then these are not needed. But if you are, then all we do is we put 3 scraps along that edge and then add another timber.
While Phil's getting the rest of the walls framed, I'm going to start installing the DPC.
When it comes to DPC, you don't actually need to stick it down like we do, but this is a top tip. If you stick it down, you're not going to have it blowing around in the wind and running away on you. So we chuck down a bead of CT1 and we stick down our course of DPC over all of the brickwork, including that doorway.
Are you working? You've got 3 days, approximately 3 days to get that garden room finished.
Do you want to see where we're at?
Oh my God, is that all you've done?
We've got nothing done yet, Dan.
Oh, what?
Alright, the time's ticking.
It's not looking good, Brad.
DB clearly didn't have any faith in us, but I wasn't worried yet. I then got on with installing our noggins or dwangs or blocking, depending on where you're from, and I set these at 1200 from the inside of that bottom plate.
Yeah, it's 7 units, son.
I'm so glad you're
That's
Brad.
isn't it? Oh, you ain't got it.
Cheers, Brad.
That was a bit top heavy.
So we're going to start bringing our walls over and pre-assembling them on the floor.
This isn't normally how we assemble our garden rooms, but because of the access on this particular one, we needed to fully build our walls on the floor and then lift them into position. So we bring over the pieces for that back wall, ready to nail it all together. The sections for our back wall are laid in position. I'm now going to clamp the pieces together just so they're nice and flush. And we're going to get it all nailed off. Another reason I use the clamps is because I am using a nail gun, and when you nail through timber that isn't braced, it might bounce apart. So if you're screwing this might not be necessary, but for the nail gun it is.
And while Phil's assembling the walls, we're going to be cutting the OSB sheets down to the correct height.
Remember, when you're cutting down your OSB sheets, this isn't the height of the studs. This is the height of the studs plus 3 plates. So we get those cut, ours come in at 180. We then sit it on the wall and start to chalk line all of our studs. That way I'm not going to miss when I start nailing it in. And I'm not actually nailing it with 90mm nails like the framework. I'm nailing this down with 63mm nails. We've just got on our first sheet of 11mm OSB, and while we was putting that on, we was squaring up our frame. So we're nice and flush along this edge, and we're also flush across the top. As well as cutting the length, we also need to cut the width for these, and that's because in the UK, our boards come in at 1/220, but our plasterboards come in at 1/2. So we set everything out to take the plasterboard, and then we cut down our OSB to meet all of the studs that we've installed on our walls.
Now it's time to install the breathable membrane.
Wow, thanks Lee. So that's exactly what we did. We got on with installing our breathable membrane onto our wall, making sure the lap is at the top. So if any water gets through, it's not going to get underneath.
So while Phil's getting that done, Lee has a pizza oven and he's actually going to be hand making pizzas in this pizza, oh my God, in this pizza cooker thing. Look at him. He's making a, what is this? Oh, look how cool that is. I'm going to show you the result.
While Gordon Ramsay and Jamie Oliver were worrying about pizza, I was over marking out for our battens.
We're going to get the battens installed on the membrane.
The purpose of these roofing battens are to allow for ventilation when we come to installing our cladding. And on this particular one, we're actually counter battening as well, which means we batten in the other direction.
So this is my one, so I've specced it. Lee, what's it looking like?
Pepperoni, cheese.
Hey, we don't just do LEDs.
Homemade pizza, mate.
Is this an Allco pizzeria?
It is.
Not only has he made it, it comes custom with his LED sign. We ain't just a home improvements channel, we are now a food review channel. So, what are we saying? I ain't gonna be able to eat that, it's gonna be too hot.
Well, while you wait for that to cool down, I'll just carry on working, shall I?
Oh, it's really good. I'll give it an 8.8. That's a good score.
Yeah, a trusted score from a trusted professional. While he was eating, I carried on getting on the last of those counterbattens, and we're nailing it all off with 63mm nails.
We are going to be using this metal corrugated sheets to clad the back and the side of this building.
And we're using that because we're so close to the boundary.
6 builders here.
Not one of us.
Builders here.
No one's got a grinder.
No one's got a grinder.
So we had to buy one.
While you're complaining, Lee, remember that includes you. So while they're cutting them down, I was installing them. Another reason we need to use these is because we are so close to the boundary, we need something that's going to be fire resistant in case anything was to ever happen. We start screwing these onto those counterbattens, and now it makes sense as to why. If we hadn't a counterbatten, we wouldn't have had any ventilation around the building, and we need that to prevent any sort of sweating within the walls. And that is our back wall finished, ready to be lifted. That's the first wall built, and it is in fact the biggest wall, and now we've got to try and lift it into place. And guess who's missing?
Lee.
Lee.
3, 2, 1.
Even though Lee had give us the slip, lucky for us, we had Ricky, Freddie and Adam on hand to help us lift this wall into position. We then temporarily braced it while we got the other 2 walls built.
Night mode has engaged already. We've got good old Adam cutting us down all the OSB. Phil's currently nogging in all the side walls, and we're just going to keep going. I hope you can hear this.
It was dark and cold, but we just kept going, trying to get this build complete. Back wall is in position. Now we're going to move on to the first of the 2 side walls. Like the back wall, access is very limited, so we're going to build this on the floor just like we did the back. The good thing about putting up a side wall is it's going to add bracing, and that way we haven't got to worry about that back wall falling over when we leave it. So I'll get on with installing the 11mm OSB. Because of the way we're assembling this, so if you have to do similar, just remember we are overselling our OSB for the thickness of this wall so that they tuck into each other. Not only do we overhang the side, we also overhang the top and the bottom, and that's because we've got a second top plate going on, and we overhang the bottom just to cover up those bricks a little bit.
Really coming together now.
Yes please, I love a long stick. After forcing Adam to say it's really coming together now, I get on with installing the counterbattens using those really long sticks before installing the cladding. Great success!
No, not yet.
Oh no, not great success yet.
Wall number 2 going up.
And this is the one that's going to give that back wall its bracing, so we haven't got to worry about it falling over. So we get that corner nailed off, and the building's a bit more secure.
So we braced this up last night, and we've had a little bit of rain. But this is not going to stop the build, we're going to continue.
While Brad was sweeping out the water, I got on with marking out the next of our walls, installing our noggins. So I was doing these as we went, just because of the space we had, and we wanted to keep the site tidy. So I got everything noggined up and brought over the next pieces that we needed to install on this build. With the walls nailed together, we got on with OSB in it and installing that waterproof membrane. That is our third wall coming together. So last night we did these 2. Now we've got some daytime. We're going to get the third and last one we're going to be assembling on the floor. Because we've got a lot more access on the front, we're not actually going to be pre-assembling that. So this is in fact the last one we're going to pre-assemble on the floor and stand up in position, because although we can do it, it is a bit more difficult to do it this way. It's a lot easier just to build it as we go. So once it's all built, with our little team of 4 and Lee's actually showed up, we get it lifted into position. With the front wall, it's not like these, because we've got access. We're actually just going to put all of our stud work up into position, and then we're going to OSB it, felt it, all while it's stood where it goes. First up was the corner next to the door. Get that nailed off, and then we can move on to the larger section, remembering that little corner detail needs to sit against the other wall, and that's going to pick up plasterboard.
Now that we've got all the framework done on the front, it's time to install the noggins.
I like to do these once the walls are up, but if you want, you can install these while they're on the floor. Those ones were built on the floor, so we're able to get everything square using our OSB. Because we're building this standing up, it's got no strength, until we put those balls on, but we also need to rack it, so make sure that it's plumb before we install them. To do that, we get a level on the end, push it till it's plumb and install a temporary diagonal brace.
That is spot on.
With our doorway, sometimes we have a flitch beam or a steel to take the weight, but because this is only a tiny little 900 door, we've actually put 2 jacks in, which is basically a stud that's going to take the head, and then we're going to put a piece of timber over the top, and then we're going to double plate it. This section of wall is only going to take about 1 of the rafters, maybe 2, so I'm not too worried about the weight that's going to sit over that door. That's the reason we just double plated it, and we do that all the way around, making sure we lap all of our joints. When you install your second top plate, you want to make sure that you're always lapping over any joins we've got in the sections of wall that we built. Well, that must be important because I said it twice. With all of the top plates on, we're now ready to install the OSB on the front section of wall. Remember, double check your plumb when you're installing this. I think I'm wasted here. Picasso. Some of you may not know this, but I'm actually a professional artist, as you can see from the piece that I drew on the wall.
Front wall is up, and now it's time to put on our membrane.
This is going to make it a little bit more clearer about what I said about the lap when we was building it on the floor. So we pin up the bottom and work our way up. That way we're always lapping from the top down, and water can't get down and behind that membrane and ruin the OSB that's on the walls. This membrane is actually what waterproofs the building, not necessarily the cladding.
That is the weather membrane complete. Now it's time to install our battens.
After Adam had marked out where all of our studs were, I got on with installing the battens, and these are 25mm by 50mm roofing battens. They work perfectly for this. I install all of our vertical battens before moving on to our horizontal ones. If you wasn't having a vertical cladding, you wouldn't need to do this. You could just stick with the single horizontal battens. When I install my battens, I do like to overrun them and then I just cut them off. But if you do want to measure and cut them to the exact length, you can do that as well. Because remember, there's no one right way. Everyone does everything a little bit different. So I like to cut mine once they're up, but if you do want to measure it, it's fine. It all works the same. And that is all of our battens installed and nailed to the wall. Before we move on to cladding the front of this wall, we're actually going to get on with our roof. And I'm also going to be marking out 150 on all of our rafters before we install them, just to save a bit of time on that back edge. What we're doing here is a 150 measurement, and that's going to allow us to have a 200mm overhang on the back. We don't need too much. The reason it's an extra 50mm is because we're going to be installing a ring beam at the end. So I set all of my roof rafters or joists at 150, and I also mark the front, and that's going to keep all of our walls square.
While Phil's fitting the roof, I'm just going to explain what Adam's doing over in the back corner. So we have got corners for the metal sheets that we put on. It's just the access is really hard to film, but I'm going to show you the best I can. Ad, how are we getting on up there?
Yeah, all good.
Are the corners going in mint?
Corners are sweet. Great success.
That's the access, that's why we can't show you.
While Paul, Freddie and Adam were installing those, I was still doing the roof. And another thing I'm checking here is the crown, making sure that it's at the top. Little tip, normally I measure and mark my top plate, but this time what I've done, I've cut a 355 block, and that's going to give us our 400 centres rather than marking it. That's right, I took what I did on the walls and I tried it on the roof, and it was definitely quicker. It's light again, and now we need to move on to the ladder detail. So basically a load of pieces of timber that sit like this, and that's going to create that edge. When I started to install my roof rafters or joists, I set the first ones 400mm back on both sides. That way I've got a sort of counter lever on this ladder detail, and then using a 400mm jig, I set them out.
While Phil's installing that last piece over there, I'd like you guys to subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free, just so me and Phil can keep making awesome content for you.
With the first ladder built, I move on to the other side and build my second ladder. That's our 2 ladders complete. Now we're going to install our ring beam, which is basically a piece of timber that goes all the way around the outside. The ring beam is the same material as the roof itself, so this is 6x2 C24, and we start off by nailing it to all of our ladders and work our way around the roof, making sure everything's tied together. And the reason I do this is it gives a solid fixing for our fascias and soffits no matter where we put our nails. I then started to get on with the front before realising I jumped the gun a little bit. I made a mistake.
You just got a bit excited.
It's not a mistake, I just jumped the gun a bit.
So we screwed that bit of timber on way too soon. All these were just put on rough, and you're supposed to cut them off first and then put that on.
In my haste to get the building complete, I'd nailed that front plate on, forgetting that I needed to cut all of the front down. Because we oversail these, and what I do, I run a chalk line through, and that way we get a nice straight soffit when we come to install it. So I marked it up and cut it all off, and then we can install that ring beam where it's actually meant to be. Now everything's nice and straight and it'll be pretty to look at.
One of the final jobs when we're framing this is to add an extra piece of timber coming through here, and that's basically for our trim that picks up our soffit, so we've got something to screw to. Here's one I made earlier.
And you'll see that in just a little while. We are done up top, we're now underneath because we need to install a row of noggins through the centre. But remember, we're not using 6-inch, we are using 4, and that's going to allow us to keep our ventilation space. And we're running these noggins through the centre of our roof. We got it all marked out with our chalk line before installing those 4-inch noggins, making sure they're nice and flush at the bottom because we don't want any trouble when we come to installing our plasterboard. So here I'm using a ratchet strap, and that's because we've got bows in those timbers, and it's just going to help us pull everything nice and straight. And that is the roof framing complete. That is our noggins installed. It's now time for furrings. All of our builds previous, we make our own furrings. This time we have purchased them. Well, I haven't, Lee has. And at 200 quid, we're going to see if it's worth the money. It's already worth the money. I'll already say thank you. They are 100% worth every penny. So with the pre-purchase furrings, we get them nailed on using some 90mm framing nails, and we're also going to be using some screws or bolts in the fronts. Also, we're putting screws in the front because we didn't say anything. Because obviously as you get thicker, you just want to move over to some screws. Because your roof is attached directly to the furrings, it's super important that these are fixed down properly, because you don't want that OSB getting ripped off in any sort of high winds or bad weather. Another little thing that we don't normally do. So I'm installing another plate on the front to hide the fronts of our furrings, and the reason I'm doing that, it's a lot easier when we put our roof trims on, because now I've got fixings the whole way along. The bottom plate will take the fixings for the fascias, but that little top section's going to take the fixings for our upstands. With those installed, it's now time to install the 18mm OSB that goes on our roof. To save time, I take the boards up full, nail them into position, and then I make any of the cuts I need to with my skill saw while I'm up on the roof. So what I'm doing with the chalk line, I just use it just to mark from my previous nail to my next nail, and it just gives a nice line for all my nails, make sure I don't miss any. Some people can just do this by eye, but for me, I like to have that line there just to make sure that I haven't got any nails hanging out on the bottom that I've missed.
Final bit. I just want to also let you know the problem we got. Phil, what is it happening tonight?
Oh, it's just a 90-mile-an-hour wind, storm, code red.
We've got 90 miles per hour wind. We didn't plan on getting the truss clips on, but we might have to get the truss clips on so the roof don't blow off tonight.
With the red weather warning inbound, we had to make sure this roof was completely finished.
Like a glove?
Like a glove.
That was the OSB complete, with plenty of daylight still to spare. With all the OSB on, our next job is to get it clean. So we're going to use a blower and get rid of all the dust, make sure there's nothing sharp left on here, then we can start looking at bringing our rubber up. This is a very important step. If you haven't seen any of our previous builds, you wouldn't know that we use a rubber system. So we use a rubber roof system, or EPDM, and we like to use that, and you'll see why when we come to install it. Well, that's normally the case, but not this time. That's not ideal, is it? That's going to ruin everything. We've got a red warning storm.
Look how short we are.
So we're going to have to figure out a way of tying this piece down and then maybe using the felt to protect the front.
So we ain't going to give up just because the roof is short. We're going to hopefully get one first thing in the morning.
We're going to carry on and we're going to move on to installing our Thermo AOS cladding that's going on the front. Due to the miscommunication, the roof was short. However, we needed to crack on, so we moved on with the Thermal AOS cladding we're having along the front of this building. Whenever you're going over like a doorway with these smaller pieces, just make sure you grab yourself a little boat level. Just keep double checking how you're looking.
What can happen?
Because otherwise it's very easy for them to start. When you're installing any natural products like this, always make sure you're using stainless fixings.
I'm drinking a lovely cup of Rosy Lee. Cheers.
Whilst Brad was working hard at drinking his tea, I carried on installing this cladding, and on this particular one we're actually hiding all of the fixings.
We can't take all the glory for installing this because we've got Rick and Freddie over there cutting all the pieces for us. We thank you very much, sirs.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank God they were there, otherwise Brad might have actually had to do some work. If you're ever installing any cladding like this, I highly recommend you get yourself a nice little mallet. So this is a holder one. Don't forget tools.
Where? I can't see them.
Well, there is a tool there, but they're also in the description. With night closing in, we was nearly complete. Last job for this front section of cladding is to install these pre-formed corners. So they just go over, and then I'll just nail through into the battens behind. And unlike everything else that I've secret fixed, these you have to face fix.
No, stop, we're going to get copyright.
So as you can see, we are in the middle of Storm Darragh, so this is the perfect time to show you how we can stop our roof being ripped off. So at the minute, the roof is only spiked in with some nails, so if enough wind got under this, it could potentially be gone. So the way we stop that, we use truss clips. So the truss clip gets pushed up onto our rafter and it gets nailed to our top plate, and we're using twist nails or a PPN gun for us, and that's just to save time. You can do it by hand. For the cost of these and the time they take to install, 100% go and get them just to make sure that your roof is fully tied down. These truss clips get installed to every single roof joist or roof rafter, making sure we put a nail in every hole on those clips, and that's just going to ensure they're fully fixed down. That's the roof attached to our walls. We've got one last job inside, and that is to attach our walls to the floor. Otherwise, there's no point attaching your roof to the walls if your walls are not bolted down. So we drill down through the brickwork and all the way into the concrete pad. We then fill the holes with resin before sliding in our threaded bar with a nut and washer on it, allowing it to dry before we bolt the whole building down to the concrete pad. We'll now let all these dry before coming back in a few hours and cranking all of those bolts down. Of course, this is Lee from Allco's house, so we're going to be installing some LEDs. So he's come up with this good idea, which I think I might steal this. We're going to use this track, so this is Allco's track, and we're going to install it right there, and then we're going to install our fascias and soffits in front. Yeah, while I'm getting wet and doing work.
No, look at this umbrella.
No, umbrella's not very good. If you'd like to donate for the cause of Brad's new umbrella, just let us know in the comments below. In case you're wondering, well, I'm just leaving that overhanging. This stuff is super strong. If you was worried about the strength of it, you could cut it back to the nearest rafter but to be honest, it's so strong, I just didn't think it needed it. So we put some screws in the pre-drilled holes up into the rafters on the roof, and that was the LED finished before moving on to the J trim. If you wasn't having this LED strip, which we've never done before, all you'd do is still install this, but it'd just go straight up to your cladding. I'm genuinely looking forward to how this LED looks, but with everything done underneath, we need to go around the whole building with that J trim ready to install our soffits.
The bit that no one ever gets to see.
No man's land.
The difficult bit. But yeah, this is because we've got no access. This is why we had to build it all. The not fun bit.
With the not fun bit complete, me and Brad moved round to the front to install that piece of soffit. Now this is 300mm and we've designed this roof to take the whole width of this soffit without it needing trimming, but the sides are going to need trimming down because it's a much shallower overhang. You may have noticed, see this little gap here? That's not an accident. You have to leave a space in the plastic because obviously it's going to move as the temperature changes. So now you know. And all of those gaps get trimmed up right at the end with some little covers that we glue into position. Now that the soffits are on, we're going to be looking at our fascias. So I like to pre-nail these ready to go on. And these are proper 18mm. You can use 9 if you want because we got that ring beam. We like to prep all of our fascias on the floor, so that's exactly what I do. And the way I do it, I just use a hammer and a speed square. So this one is for the back and side, so I set these nails at 50mm from the bottom and 100, but for the front we're doing 50 and 150. That is all of our fascias prepared. Now we've got to try and get them on that building.
Hopefully it don't rain.
Probably will. With Storm Darragh in full swing, this is where things start to get a bit risky because we need to unfix that roof that we had temporarily installed. And as you can see, it was definitely windy. When you're putting it in the poly top, so these ones here, just be careful because if you do hit that fascia, it's pretty much dented for life. And nobody wants a dented fascia, so just take your time on this bit. If you haven't got too much skill with a hammer, taking your time is definitely what you need to do. So we get that nailed in nice and carefully, and lucky for us, we didn't dent any of it.
People don't keep the black in stock. I like the black.
Yeah.
Black's so hard to get in it.
It's not easy to get this stuff. In fact, this is the wrong stuff. This is supposed to be pre-vented, and they sent the wrong one. So now what we're going to do is drill it and put our own vents in after.
No biggie. All I need is one of them things and it'll be perfect.
That is what I have to work with. So with the fascias on, it was now time to start trimming them down to size so they fit perfectly.
Trying to keep all the water inside because the OSB can't get wet.
That is all the fascias installed and cut down. Now let's install the rubber for the second time. Lucky for us, because this was roll stock, it didn't need to sit and relax like you would normally do. So normally we'd fold it out, leave it for a day or two, and all of the creases would settle out. But because we had taken this straight off the roll and straight onto the roof, there wasn't really any creases in it. So with the storm closing in, it was time to start gluing out. And this may look like it's sped up, but that was actually the speed I was moving because that storm was closing in.
We wish we had a better broom right now.
A better broom was quite low on my list of things that I wanted. Not getting blown off the roof was pretty high up there at this stage.
While we're doing this, there is a big scary tree there. It's so high.
What you can't see is that tree is pretty much dead and it's swaying about 3 or 4 foot left to right.
Oh my god, wind's out, filtering it out. It's pulling it off this corner as well. Oh my god. Oh my god. What's up there?
Even with the storm fighting us every second of the way, we managed to get the rubber roof laid out. And it was finally time to get our double stick or contact adhesive around the whole perimeter so we didn't have to worry about that roof getting ripped off with the 90-mile-an-hour winds that we was facing.
I'm now going to trim down the rubber. So, as you can see, I'm just allowing 50mm on the two sides and front, but I'm leaving the back long.
At this stage, me and Brad was having to shout just so we could hear each other through the wind. And what I had to do there was cut all of that rubber down so there was a 50mm overhang, and we could finally get the trims installed on this roof so it was safe.
So, now that we've got that little ramp section added under the rubber, we fold the rubber back over, and then this piece sandwiches the rubber into position. So what I'll do with these, I'll get a nail. This is a Phil's top tip. Roll it into position, and then before I put my nail in to one of the pre-drilled holes, I just give that rubber a little stretch, push the nail into the rubber, and it just puts a little bit of tension on this back edge.
And because this is the gutter trim, we don't actually shorten that rubber down. We only do that once the gutter's installed.
So it's taken us 5 days.
Me and Phil was not prepared for the carnage in this build. I hope you've enjoyed it. Just remember to subscribe to the channel if you're not, and we will catch you on the next one.